Why do Premier League teams avoid Championship players? Antoine Semenyo, the man of the moment, excluding that freak who is Erling Haaland, there's an argument to be made that he's been the most effective player in English football this season. But he didn't hone his skills in the Premier League, much like Jarrod Bowen, richest. They all developed in the Championship. So why don't they shop there more regularly? It was reported by The Athletic that there were 14 transfers from the Championship to the Premier League last summer. To compare this, there was 20 from the Bundesliga, 15 from Serie A, there was even 11 from the Eredivisie. You have to bear in mind that 3 of these Championship signings were backup keepers and 4 were loan signings. Then you go further and you see 75% of the transfer fees were also paid to Southampton, Ipswich and Leicester, who were all relegated from the Premier League last year. So for all intents and purposes, those players were Premier League footballers. And only 25% of the transfer fees were paid to regular starters the Championship last year. Why though? Because if we're looking at some of England's last games they played, Albania for example, 6 out of the 23-man squad were playing regular football in Championship within the last 6 years. Not on loan from a big club, a permanent player. That's also not to mention someone like Adam Wharton, who in a few years, if he's going the same way he's going, he's probably going to command a fee of over 80 to 100 million. Look, even if we're taking into account the record transfers in Premier League history, Jack Grealish, for example, a man who was excellent in the Premier League, don't get me wrong, but started to flourish under Steve Bruce and Dean Smith, where in the Championship. Right, my last thing to drive this point into the ground, the top 30 Ballon d'Or rankings that came out a few weeks ago, there were 3 players who played at least 2 seasons in the Championship. That was Michael Olise, Victor Gyökeres and Jude Bellingham. So my first answer is the age-old debate with English managers. In this current Premier League season, there's a grand total of 2 English managers, and one has just got promoted from the Championship in Scott Parker with Burnley, and of course Eddie Howe with Newcastle. And you can throw in David Moyes for being British with Everton. Naturally, foreign coaches are going to buy and recruit from the league and the countries that they're used to working in. It's not a coincidence, at the start of Pep's time at Man City, he was bringing in a lot of Spanish players, Nolito, Negredo, Jesus Navas. How Erik ten Hag basically bought half of the Netherlands when he joined Manchester United. For the most part, the Championship just isn't on the radar for a lot of these foreign coaches, whereas English managers are more familiar with this league. Dean Smith, for example, bought Ezri Konsa and Ollie Watkins for Aston Villa. David Moyes bought Jarrod Bowen for West Ham. Roy Hodgson bought Eze for Crystal Palace. Unfortunately, you just buy what you know, and with English managers, they normally have to work their way up through the divisions. Because unless you're a legend like a Frank Lampard who got his first job at Chelsea, for the most part these managers are coming up through non-league and League 2 and League 1. So they would have played against a lot of these players and they would have seen more hidden gems compared to a Spanish coach who was only coached in Spain. Just as a non-tangible reason though, it's arrogance, isn't it? Because let me ask you a question, if you sport a decent sized club in the Premier League, if I said to you, you could buy a French winger 22 years old from Nice, or you could buy an English winger who was 22 years old from Millwall, you'd be more excited about the French winger. I do think that there's a misconception that every Championship team still plays 4-4-2. Every coach is from Rotherham, and every single winger plays like a Chris Brunt. But in reality, if you actually have a look down into the Championship, there's a lot of dynamic, exciting players. Hayden Hackney will be playing Premier League football within probably the next year. Jay Stansfield will probably get a move eventually. Josh Sargent for Norwich has been one of the best strikers in the league recently. All of these players had long stays in the Championship, but 100% could do a job for a mid-sized Premier League club. And the teams themselves are playing expansive football. Look at Enzo Maresca at Leicester. He's taken his style, what he did there, and now is moving it to Chelsea. Even Chris Wilder, not now, but like 5 years ago with his attacking centre-backs. Saying this, I do think there is a difference because of the gap in finances with the Premier League and the Championship, which leads there to be a perception that there's a huge gap in quality. The Championship winners get paid around 11 million, at least that's what Leeds United did last year. Southampton, who finished bottom of the Premier League, 109 million. So it's not an unreasonable perspective, but that doesn't necessarily mean the talent just falls off a cliff. Of course, most teams do have a big skill gap when they get promoted into the Premier League. Look at Ipswich. Ipswich was such a fun team to watch, but they only won 4 games last year. However, if we look at that squad, Liam Delap and Amari Hutchinson, they got sold for around £70 million just this last transfer window. Football is of course a team game, so clearly a lot of these attackers for these championship teams, or the ones that get newly promoted, they're going to get sacrificed a lot because they're not going to have the ball enough to prove how good they are. And this is why I find it confusing, because if a team like Brighton can go to South America and find all these brilliant players, surely they can just travel up the M1 and find some half decent players in the championship. Another big factor of course has to be the Premier League academy system. Most talented young players are swept up into these academies at a really young age, meaning if there's a fantastic player at QPR for example, it wouldn't take until they're 25 to uncover. Raheem Sterling's a great example. Liverpool bought him at age 15 for around 500k I believe. He was never going to make it as a regular first team starter for QPR because he had some of the best clubs in the world regularly focusing on him. Look at, for example, Tim Iroegbunam for Everton. Was developed at West Brom for around 10 years, then moved to Everton's academy for a couple of years, and now is a squad player for the first team. If a championship academy player is making any noise, he'll probably be in a Premier League academy before he's even signed his first professional deal. However, despite me like 4 minutes ago saying foreign coaches don't go into the championship, it feels like other leagues are starting to trust the division more than the Premier League. I mean, Victor Gyökeres is clearly the standout after playing 3 full seasons in the championship, splitting his time with Swansea and Coventry. Sporting Lisbon paid around €24 million for him. Less than a season later, he's then one of the most touted strikers in world football. Borja Saiz, after scoring 18 goals last season, Porto signed him for around €15 million. Gabriel Sara was sold to Galatasaray from Norwich in 2024. However, if I'm arguing against this point, you could say some top Premier League teams might just wait for other European clubs to either make them into great players or just make them into terrible players. I mean, Victor Gyökeres, for example, if Arsenal had bought him from Coventry for around 25 million, that's a huge risk that could completely blow up in their faces. And I'd argue it's actually a bigger risk than buying him from a championship club at 25 million compared to buying him from Sporting Lisbon for around 60 million. But this is the point though. I suppose another factor could be the price of championship players. They're increasing. If we're excluding newly relegated players like a James Maddison, Romeo Lavia and Nathan Ake, we'll look at the top fees Premier League teams have paid for a second division player. João Pedro left Watford for 30 million. Ollie Watkins left Brentford for 28 million. These aren't bargains. I mean, at the time, if anything, they were probably seen as risks. Before his 25 goal season for Brentford, Ollie Watkins had only scored 10 goals a season in the Championship. Whereas Sunderland, for example, this just gone transfer window, they bought Habib Diarra for 20 million. Leeds bought Noah Okafor, who was playing for AC Milan 2 years ago, for around 15 million. Despite not being better players in practice, on the face of it, it's much better value for money in a footballing world that is completely dominated by PSR. And also with coaches being from different countries, a lot of the ownership groups are as well. And it does not take a genius to think, if you're going to your owner who barely even knows what football is, never mind the English Championship, I'm buying Noah Okafor from AC Milan, or I'm buying Borja Saiz from Norwich, I think the one with AC Milan in the title is probably going to land a bit better with them. It's quite frustrating just as a fan of football, hearing especially the striker debate at the moment. There seems to be a pool of like 7 strikers that all the top teams can buy. Yet looking back, like I say, Ollie Watkins, Ivan Toney, Chris Wood, Brian Mbeumo, all players that, yes, improved in the Premier League, but were all brilliant in the Championship. And of course, players like Adam Armstrong, Sam Smodigs were both prolific in the Championship and they struggled in the top flight. And I'm not saying if Man United signed Joel Perreault this summer, they would be top of the league right now. But I think my point is there are so many more options that it seems teams are just limiting themselves. And of course, as you get further and further up in the food chain, yes, the options do become more limited. Liverpool had to sign a player like an Isaac or an Ekitike. Real Madrid are always going to sign an Mbappe. However, these mid-table Premier League clubs who just seem to be obsessed with the Serie A, the Bundesliga, La Liga, I personally think it will do them so much more positive if they just looked in the division below sometimes. To finish the video, I think in my opinion and in my personal experience, there are so many top players, just like in Yorkshire alone with me, that just seem to slip through the net for whatever reason. But they go through the semi-professional route, they go through League 2, League 1, and if they were given a chance at a better club, because let's face it, a lot of these players from lower leagues, they go to a better club and yes, they do crumble, but some of them, I mean, you play better when you're around better players. But let me know what you think. Let me know what you think of Championship footballers. Should more of them be given a chance into the Premier League? I personally just think it shows with Adam Wharton, Eze, Jarrod Bowen, Ollie Watkins, Semenyo. Over the last few years, all of these are top Premier League players, and to me it's so irritating seeing a team like Man United, even though I don't really care that much about them, seeing them buy players like an Agati who just clearly isn't a Premier League footballer, and Adam Wharton just got picked up by Crystal Palace for 20 million, and now he's one of the best midfielders in the league. But like I say, leave a comment below. If you leave a like on the video, that'd be great, leave a comment, but thanks for watching.